Okay, so there's been lots of talk about graphene lately, and after the recent video by GCN, the Global Cycling Network, on the graphene bike, I've been asked many times since then on my views on graphene, specifically in the bike market. So now, having watched the GCN video, I thought that it was a little confusing. And appears to be getting mixed up between the theoretical properties of graphene sheet or fibre, which doesn't really exist in any usable quantities at this point in time, and getting that confused with graphene oxide filled resins and variants of that. So so while the theoretical properties of the graphene sheet, look, they're incredible. They're very, very impressive. But it's not actually what's being used here. And it is mentioned by the presenter. However, he switches sort of from the theoretical properties to its use in that bike, sort of in an unclear way. So leading to some of the confusion, and that's why people have been asking me about to explain some of these things. So from what I've seen on graphene, and I've been following this for quite some time, even did an article with Bike Radar back in early 2015 or something like that, and that's that the graphene oxide and other variants of that. It's all the chemistry of it. And that's been used to improve the resin properties. So in a similar way to what the carbon nanotube filled resins have been in the past, so they're sort of continuing to evolve that side of the chemistry of the resin. So so the research shows that the graphene oxide and other variants of these filled resins, they can have a really good positive effect on the toughness of the resin, and bring some other properties to the resin. So if you want to go into the science, there's plenty of it online. I'll show you a quick link. There's all these published papers by research organisations, universities, defence groups, a whole bunch of things. So you could spend days reading about all the different chemistry. So but the thing to be mindful of. There's one thing, it's to be doing something in a lab, in very small quantities, and it's another thing to be rolling out production bikes. So yeah. So just doing a quick Google search, and you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff on mechanical properties and electrical properties and magnetic properties. It just goes on and on. So anti-corrosive, graphene epoxy, dielectric, a whole bunch of things. So as you see, there's over 300,000 articles there just in Google Scholar. So there's a lot of information out there. So referring back to the GCN video, unfortunately no actual test data is presented, which is sort of confusing, because he did say, as you can see from the data, but then we actually didn't see any data. So and the section where they show sheets of pre-preg material held up against the light, and showing that the transfer of light is sort of related to the strength. It's sort of, I don't know, it's very misleading, and it's a poor example. So what the it's all dependent on the weave. So anyway, I'll show you some examples of different fabrics so you can see what I mean. Okay, so here we've got a range of different fabrics, and we're going to put them over the light table, and have a look at the at the weave. So I'll run through the fabrics that we've got. Got a 1K plain weave, which is 19 threads per inch. We've got a 1K plain weave in pre-preg, which is 24 threads per inch. And then we've got the same fabric, 1K plain weave, 24 threads per inch, but just dry fabric. We've got a 6K 150 gram unidirectional. We've got a 6K 370 gram 4 harness satin weave. We've got a 3K plain weave that's 160 gram. We've got a 3K plain weave in pre-preg, which is 200 gram. We've got a 200 gram 3K twill, and we've got a 200 gram 3K 4x4 twill. So let's put them on the light table and see how much light gets through. So obviously this one, there's a lot of space between the toes, so you can quite evidently see the amount of light that's coming through that. So have a look at the next one. Not much light coming through this one. That's the pre-preg, and it's a tighter weave. Okay, so this is the dry version of that, so the same fabric that we just saw. So without any resin in it, so you can clearly see quite a lot of light coming through that one. Now the unidirectional, we're going to get nothing through that because that's just all fibre. Let's have a look at the 3K. Lots of light coming through that one. .3K pre-preg. Still lots of light. You can see the spacing between the toes. The twill, again, lots of light visible through that one. And the 4x4, it's quite a dense weave, so we're not seeing much light shining through that one at all. And then lastly, the 4 harness satin, and we're getting nothing coming through this one at all. So that's it. So as you can see, the amount of light coming through the fabric is more a factor of what the weave is. Also, the purpose of the epoxy matrix is to bond the fibres together, so each fibre can transfer load to the adjacent fibre. So it doesn't require the graphene oxide filler to do that. Yeah, look, the graphene filler may enhance some of the properties of the resin, but it's not going to change the properties of the overall composite by more than what the resin to fibre ratio is. So, so in a good composite laminate, the typical fibre to resin ratio by volume is sort of between 60 and 70%. Sometimes lower, and I've seen some data on some cross sections of different bikes where they've actually measured the resin content, etc. It sort of depends on the fabric type, whether it's unidirectional or it's woven. So, as you can see with the the gaps in the weave, in the examples I just showed you, that those gaps get filled with resin, so you've got a higher resin content. So, other things that affected the rate of bleed, like are you allowing enough flow of the resin, and a whole bunch of other variables. But anyway, if you vary that resin content by by much from the optimum resin content for the specific fabric type being used, it leads to some structural reduction in structural properties and other concerns. So for more information on that, have a look at the videos I did on resin rich and resin dry for some further info. As it sort of explains having too much and too little resin in that. So I don't have the data on the density of the resin, on the filled resin that was used in that example on the GCN video. However, epoxy is typically in the range from 1.1 to 1.3. So I'm not sure how it's possible to reduce the resin weight by adding a small amount. And when I say small amount, typically these filled resins have up to about 5% of these fillers. So, and the weight of graphene, the density of graphene, I mean, carbon is sort of within the range of 1.8 or thereabouts. So anyway, I don't think, looking at the numbers, you're not going to be changing the weight of the resin in a significant way. So there's just some more confusion there in the video. So if you look at typical resin by volume is sort of 30 to 40%. So even if the resin is lighter, it's not going to change the weight of the composite, the complete product that much. So I've done a few calculations. I'll show them up in this table, and so you can see that it does have an effect on reducing the weight, but it's not as large as what you may think. So this table shows the final frame weight with basically the same amount of fibre in each frame, and the fibre volume is 65%. So all we're doing is changing the resin density. So if we halve the resin density, which is unrealistic, we save 90 grams on the frame. If we reduce the resin density by 10%, we save 18 grams on the frame. So suffice to say that the latest developments in resin technology are a good step forward with composite materials. However, looking at the bike industry specifically, the newer resins have had a lower effect on the structural properties of the bikes in practice than they had in theory. So many of the nano resin bikes, from 5+ years ago, they weren't actually any lighter than any of the other bikes, and they seem to fail just as often. So it really highlights that good design and manufacturing process can't be substituted with theoretically superior materials and everything's going to work out. So if you've got areas of porosity and voids and wrinkles, having the best resin available isn't going to make up for those shortcomings. So the product still needs to be built well. So no voids, no wrinkles, good fibre content, etc. So typically, with currently available materials, your fibre is around between 40 and 80 times the tensile properties of the resin. So obviously it depends on the grade of fibre and the specifics of the resin. There's so many different resins out there, and different price points, etc. So, but then even if you double the properties of the resin, you're only making a small difference to the overall tensile properties. So compression and shear are a little bit different, and you can change that, but it's really the fibre that's doing the bulk of the work, particularly in tensile load and tensile stiffness. So, However, these resins can improve the toughness of the of the composite material, and that's a big gain. So that's where the advantages really are. It's not so much in dropping the weight, although it is composites are there to reduce weight, but the advantage is by improving the toughness of it, so you get more durable stuff. So some of the research I've seen has shown if you're getting the fibre architecture right and using the right blend of filled resins, you can actually have material which is tougher than steel, and steel's pretty tough. Like, it's been around for a long time. It's evolved over 100 years. It's optimized. Steel is good, So to have a material that is as tough as steel and significantly lighter than steel, that's huge. So so I don't know. Maybe in the future, people will be saying, carbon is real instead of steel is real. I don't know. It doesn't seem to roll off the tongue as easy though. So coming back to the bikes, the basic shape hasn't changed for pretty much over 100 years, and there's a number of reasons for that. The UCI brought in a whole bunch of regs sort of a little while ago, etc. But the fundamental thing is that when the bikes were first designed, the materials weren't nearly as good as what they are today, and so the design had to be very structurally efficient, and so that double diamond sort of triangulated design is structurally very, very efficient. So over the years we've had advancements to reduce the weight and improve the ride, and that's come from advancements in the materials technology as well. So when the high grade steels came out, when was that, sort of in the 50s, with Reynolds tubing and the Columbus tubing, and that was a step change in bikes. That took it to a whole nother level. So then came the aluminium alloys, which reduced the weight even further, but then the ride sort of seemed to suffer in a lot of people's opinion. And now you've got carbon composite, where it's light and you can tune the ride with different fibre orientations, grades, etc. like that. So what we'll see in the future, we don't know yet. So graphene has got some incredible properties, which are only just being discovered. It's a new material. Like steel has been around for like 100 years, and even that keeps improving. So we're only at the tip of the iceberg. So will we see a true, like a full graphene sheet frame in the future? I don't know. Or will something else come along to see even better? So it wasn't that long ago carbon nanotubes was talked about being the best thing, and then graphene came along and filled that gap very quickly. So yeah. So but in the Bike Radar article, I mentioned that one of the things I mentioned was being sort of pie in the sky, but with graphene you could potentially have the frame as a superconductor, or as a supercapacitor, sort of like a battery, and then the surface generates electricity from the solar. So it's basically solar panels built into the bike, so it's catching that energy, and then that you've got then your battery or your power supply for your lights and for your electronic shifting, and I know you can maybe even supply the grid with power, and so all these bikes riding around are supplying power to the grid. I don't know, So, but it's these electrical properties and things like the smart structures with sensors integrated into the bike, and and that's far more interesting than just dropping a few grams of weight on the bike. So that's where I see the real interesting direction of the technology. So if you remember 100 years ago, electronics didn't exist, and you know, even basic lighting is unrecognisable from what we take for granted today. So, so materials such as graphene, they may take this to a whole nother level. You know, we don't know yet. So, you know, as an example, you know, my grandmother saw the Wright brothers' first flight, and then saw a man walk on the moon. You know, in a space of, you know, 60, bit over 60 years. So, yeah, who knows what's going to happen in the next in the next 50, 60 years. It's like, yeah, I don't know what's going to be happening in the next 2 years. You know, so so time will tell if some of these features and these ultralight frames that are suggested, if that comes to fruition. So anyway, that sums up this video, and you know, I hope you learned something. You know, as usual, put comments below. If you like what you see, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, and we'll see you again soon. Okay, thanks. Bye.